All right, and we are recording. All right, Mr. Boobles, kick us off, man.
All right, we have Patricia Kong on with us. And Patricia, you're one of the co creators of evidence-based management and a bunch of other things, right? You've co wrote a couple of books with different people. So we're happy to have you on. Yeah, I know. Tell us more. I started, but now tell us more, Patricia. Give us a little bit more about your background.
Um, so I'm actually pretty happy that I'm during quarantine wearing makeup for you guys since you're recording this on video. From a Scrum.org perspective, I've been at Scrum.org for, I don't know, almost 8 years, maybe more, maybe less. My background before I got to Scrum.org is like a lot of good Asian Americans. I was in financial services, in investment banking. So I come from this really corporate background and this very authoritarian culture in general, but made my way through research and moved into product development and product management. And had my back against the wall. And I was living abroad at that point, and then I was coming back and found Scrum.org and Ken Schwaber. And it's because I had learned about Agile and Scrum when my shit was hitting the fan. So that happened. And when I came here, Ken was working on something called continuous improvement framework. At that time, a lot of organizations were starting to talk about scaling. And so he said, well, how can you scale if you don't know how you're doing? And so that was a premise of evidence-based management. So I had been working previously on thinking about what are we doing when we're scaling, right? So Scrum.org talks about extending Scrum with the Nexus framework for multiple teams working on a product. And we were still saying, you know what? People aren't getting it. So we said, what evidence do you have that this is improving? And so for a while, I've been developing something called evidence-based management with the Scrum.org team. And it's a framework that says, hey, how do you measure value and continuously improve toward customer outcomes, right? So looking at goals. And you go, hey, short version, it's just empiricism.
Mm-hmm.
So that's it. Is the podcast done?
Not quite. No, so let's talk a little bit more about EBM. So for those that are out there, okay, it's metrics, it's empiricism on how we're driving our organization, but like what are the components behind it, and how does it actually work? Like, give us a little more background on that framework.
Okay, so I would say one of the quick ways to think about it, and there's the component of measuring in there because we're talking about what would you inspect. So when we think about value, when we think about what organizations are trying to do to sustain, right? We said, well, what are they looking at? And you go, oh, well, naturally, we're just looking at the area of are our customers happy, are our employees happy? Okay, what else do organizations need to look at? Well, they should be looking at what's going on in the market. What else? Well, they really need to figure out what their speed is. Like, can they get things out to market and can they innovate? And we said, yep. So we have 4 key value areas in evidence-based management. Current value, which is where are you as an organization, your current value. And then unrealized value, right? When you look outside of yourself as an organization, what is that potential value you have? So we're looking at the market capability. And then you would say, all right, well, you have all these ideas and these outcomes for your customers, right, that you're trying to achieve, hopefully. Can you actually deliver on that? So now we're looking at our organizational capability of time to market and ability to innovate. So we say, when you're thinking about your measures, the things that you're looking at, are you looking in those 4 key value areas? Where are you suffering? Where do you want to improve? You probably know that as an organization, right? And so it's kind of saying we have generally output metrics that we look at. How do we start to translate that, to a value conversation, to an outcome conversation? So we were there. And then recently, we actually just updated the EBM guide. So there's an EBM guide. It's like the Scrum guide. It's out there for free. Because we were working with a lot of clients and they said, oh, I don't know why I'm doing this. And we said, oh, we need a goal. Mm-hmm. So we just recently added this notion of goals in there that if you're doing something and you're trying to make improvement, have a direction you're going to towards. So have a goal, and we make different layers of goals in there. So, a strategic goal that you're trying to pursue as an organization. So that's something audacious that you're reaching toward. And, here are the intermediate things you're going to try to do. And those are the things that you're going to review as on a cadence to know that if you're going in the right way or not, right? So those are the things that we've been thinking about. And when we talk about goals, we just say, hey, specific and measurable. Other things, are they nice? Yes. Should we be thinking about frequency? Should we be thinking about transparency? Yes. But we want to make them specific and measurable so that you know if you're moving in the right direction or not. And it's been really interesting when we talk about the KVAs, and underneath them they have, we have suggested measurements that people can look at, but in the EBM guide in the appendix. But when you look at the KVAs, what's really been interesting at this point this year is that a lot of organizations are saying, I need to be really careful about how I invest, right? How do I think about value? So I need to be careful about that. And so how is it that I can now have a holistic view on where I should be investing? Where do I not know? Where am I not tracking information? If I'm not tracking it, if I'm not looking at this holistically, how do I know what I need to alter and what knob I need to turn? So
Yeah,
that's a little bit more.
Definitely helps get you alignment. Actually, I want to go back to something you said before. You said, outcomes over outputs, basically, is what we're looking at measuring. And Jeff, you have a really good video out there about activities, outputs, outcomes, and then impacts. I don't know if we want to just dive into that real quick, just for our listeners, so they kind of understand the difference between those different kinds of metrics and what we're really talking about here.
Sure, I'll jump in really quick with this. Good tee up, Jeff. But I know when we get to the outcome and impact, there might be a little bit of good conversation that comes out of it. But we've got activity metrics, and really just hours that you're putting into something. So somebody spending 40 hours a week, that's an activity. Output is essentially what are the things that you're creating with that time? Is it PBIs? Is it your throughput? Is it the bug defect count? Whatever that might be, just counts of things. So activity, you do activities to get outputs, but you're creating outputs in order to get an outcome of some sort. So great, your team last sprint worked on these 7 PBIs. These 7 PBIs was a new checkout workflow in your CMS application. You think Amazon, right? You made a new checkout workflow. And because you did that, you reduced cart abandonment rate by 3%. That's awesome. That was the impact that you were going for, right? So there's your outcome that you were going for. And then your impact is more at the organization level. Like, what was the outcome of the fact that you were able to reduce cart abandonment rate? Well, there was a bottom line number that you were able to hit, right? So your financials went up by X amount of dollars. And that was the overall impact that it had to the organization. That's how I've often articulated it. What would you adjust in there, either Jeff or Patricia?
So very interesting. When we actually have this activity, output, outcome, impact notion, and we were talking about impact on what is the impact on the organization, and the outcome is what is the customer outcome. And everybody started having a different opinion on what impact was. Mm-hmm. So actually in the, did you guys face that too? So actually in the EBM guide, we said, you know what? That's great that everybody has a different point of view. Actually, we're just going to keep this to activity, output, and outcome. So we explain it nicely, closely together, Jeff Wholistic.
Yeah, I think Julie Everett was actually somebody who was going back and forth with this in a good way, like trying to explain, and this is where you get into the nuance and the interpretation of what impact is. Like, great, you could say it's a bottom line financial, but really, like, what good is that? Like, what is the organization then able to do? What's their benefit to society, right? Like, oh, are they able to invest more in the community because they were able to get this? Or, oh, they were able to reinvest into educational resources for their employees or whatever, right? Like, there's so many different ways that you can take that impact conversation. And I feel like you just kind of dodged a bullet with it. We're like, is it, at the end of the day, is that really so important, or is it really just the outcome that we're going after?
I mean, that's a whole nother conversation. Impact to society, all those other things.
Right. So I like where you kind of cut it off at that point. It's like after that point, like, there's a good, healthy debate or conversation to be had around that, but is it really so important, or should we just all agree that, like, outcomes are really what we're after here. It's not the activity or even the output metrics that are
Yeah.
so often given focus to.
I think that it definitely is not the activities. There might be some outputs like cycle times that matter, right, for like our time to market, ones. But there's certain set ones. For the most part, we want to be away from even the outputs and be in the outcomes or even impacts. And I think impacts, if you want to classify those as outcomes too, I guess I'm okay with that. But there are things like, hey, what's the run rate of my team? If I'm a startup organization, I only have so much cash flow, and how much money's coming in, and how much money am I paying out? And I need to hit break even by a certain point. I need to be measuring that and looking at that, over time. And so I think those are things that, some people might have avoided in the past. Or if you say, oh, we're only looking at customer outcomes, we're only looking at our, daily active users or something like that, or future usage rate, you're going to miss some of that, and you could run out of money and be out of business before you know what's happening. So I think what I like about what we talk about in EBM is, yeah, that's all included. Like, what do you need? Like, every context is different, and let's find the right metrics for you in your situation. And that let's balance them and make conscious decisions about what is important and what's not important. I'll tell a quick little story. Actually, just happened yesterday. I was talking with somebody, and they're a leader in an organization, and we're talking about the situation where they had a lot of maintenance going on in their application, and unrealized value is very, very high. There's a high opening for stuff to big market opportunity, and customer satisfactions, they've kind of they're doing okay, but like they missed the mark in the last couple of releases, and they've seen they haven't got the usage they were expecting to get here. They're not capturing the market like they thought. But 85% of their time is for maintenance and for support and bug fixes. And they're like, well, we need to get really efficient on that. And then and I'm like, no, like you need to get rid of that. That's the first thing you need to do so you can spend more time capturing that market. And so that was just a good strategic conversation that we had around why you would do what you would do. Like you have a choice to be okay with dependencies that you have and the situation you have and just work within that, or to change the environment that you have. And I think we had good conversations of why we just want to change it so that we're in a better situation long term.
Yeah, and that's what's important, right? The conversation. And then it's going to be like, what experiment are you going to try to run? But it's amazing when I've had that experience of breaking those things down, and they go, oh, this is it. Let's just spend more money there. And you go, oh,
Yep.
nope. But what about this? Let me tell you how much money you could save if you just, clean that up. So those are all really, really helpful conversations that I think in the conversations and the workshops and all that stuff that I've conducted.
Yeah, and I think when you see it all together, that's what paints the picture. Because I could have looked at all those metrics separate, and I might not have seen that this was what was happening, and might not have been able to have that conversation like I had. So I think that's the really great way to see it all together.
What do you guys think about the goals piece?
So by the time this comes out, the new Scrum guide will be out there. So I'm not worried about that tangential piece to this. But I like that, especially, and I don't know if it's just because it's the new buzzword in the Agile community, but like there's a lot of conversations around OKRs that are out there. In fact, I think the last time that, actually, I think both Jeff and I were there for that face-to-face, but you were talking about 6 degrees of, what is it?
Separation?
No, I'm getting it. It's
Me?
40x. No. Yeah.
40x.
40x. Thank you.
Yes.
I always.
Yes.
So we had a conversation because where Jeff and I were at the time, that was an organization that was starting to unroll OKRs, and you had introduced me to 4DX and a lot of the similarities there. And all of that really kind of makes sense that if you don't, just like anything, if you're not sure where you're going, how can you measure success against it? And so having an understanding of what is the end state, what is the goal, is really how you backwards plan against it. So I was actually almost kind of curious, one, were you involved with any of the conversations with the Scrum Guide at all? And or did any of that influence why the goal got put into the EBM framework?
I'm just going to say no. I would say that thinking though has been there. And so, for instance, some of the things that we see in the Nexus guide, we will have worked with Ken Traver on the Nexus guide, and then some of that thinking will go into the Scrum guide after. So it's almost maybe that was pointing us in a certain direction in our work with him. But it's really from, when the EBM and the current state that we have it in now with the new EBM guide is not that far when we started at the beginning, the journey in 2013 around the continuous improvement framework. It was almost like people just couldn't digest it. And so we took pieces of it and said, can you just think about what you're measuring and how you would improve? How would you just get started? And then when we started doing that, the other parts of the continuous improvement framework, or this notion of, move in a certain direction, it just came back naturally, because it was like, okay, they're measuring, and now for some reason we need to tell them why they're measuring, and I'm talking about organizations loosely, but the whole thing around 40X and even OKRs, these are nice management models, but they can be used in a way that we have found is just really prescriptive and not looking necessarily at goals, not necessarily looking at outcomes, and not necessarily looking at value. So when you use OKRs, I've sat with some clients who said, we use OKRs now, but what they're really using is just saying, team, target that KPI. Hit that KPI. There's no room for experiment. So there's a lot of things that are awesome about OKRs and 40X. We're just trying to keep it as simple as we can. But those things, it's interesting having looked through all of that. How do they complement each other and how do they work together? Are strong models.
So when you were outlining the 4 KVAs earlier, so unrealized value, current value, time to market, ability to innovate, when I articulate this with individuals that are interested in the framework, I often set the perspective of, essentially, if you just drew a line in it separated the top and the bottom, you've got basically your business metrics and your IT metrics. Like when we used to think about two different areas of the organization, the business is focused on value, like how much money is this generating, where are we going after, who's our customer segments, what are we targeting with all of this stuff, and your IT, your VP of IT or whatever is like, how much shit are we getting done? How quick is this going out, right? Like, and now we just created the peanut butter and jelly sandwich of awesomeness and like squish these two sides together. Back to what Jeff was talking about earlier, just more of a holistic picture to that. Now, what I'm curious about from that, and part of me thinks it's because of my more technology-based background, is so literally on my other screen, I have my EBM dashboard up that I'm taking a look at. And it's embarrassingly lacking in some areas, but the IT metrics, the cycle time, the innovation rate, expansion maintenance, the velocity, the raw count, total known defects, that's all really easy for me to get at, and that makes sense to me. Where it starts to not make so much sense to me is current value. And so like I'm tracking employee satisfaction, customer satisfaction, our app reviews in the iOS store, the Google Play store. And then unrealized value is kind of just an open nothingness right now. I'm curious, like, is that normal? Do those unrealized and current value tend to be harder ones for organizations when they're thinking about and setting up that dashboard? Or I guess I'd love to get some feedback from your experience with this.
Yeah, I think it just depends on potentially what's at hand and what you're used to looking at, right? So a lot of the times there are certain measures and metrics that you've thought about. But if I were to say, hey, Jeff, in time to market, have you started to think about how you would capture the time to pivot? Oh, that's a new one. How would I think about that, right? And so the same kind of thing. And by the way, when you said, oh, top to bottom, that line, I saw the same thing and I drew that same line about, the market conditions and also about the operational capability. When we're talking about current value, I think that those things, you're capturing them. They sound fine, right? What's hard is how do you make that connection between those different areas? And the point is that if you said, you know what, I really need to affect something in current value because I'm looking at customer satisfaction. So for instance, I was working with a company in Brazil and they were outsourcing and they said, our customers are not happy because our quality sucks. So they said, we're going into ability to innovate. We're looking at all these things, trying to increase the product quality, and they track that in current value. It could be as simple as that. When you're thinking about this notion of goal, right? The notion of the goal can express itself, I think, through unrealized value. And you're looking at a satisfaction gap. So where are your customers, or where are those people now? And where are they? Where could they be? What is that gap that you're trying to close with whatever service or product you're offering? So, is there a potential that, and, is there a market share, all those things that you could look at, right? So that's sitting down and doing those things. But if you at least express your goal, that's cool. Current value, where I think it can get specific, is imagining that outcome that you're trying to satisfy for the customer. So a quick question that I usually flip to clients is, what does your customer want from your product? That's going to be specific to you, right? It's going to be specific to you versus it's going to be specific, I don't know, to someone who's trying to get their prescription filled online, or a doctor who's trying to submit their insurance claim. And that is what the company, when I asked that, this product, they said, for healthcare SaaS, they said the doctor wants to submit their their claim, and they want to minimize the amount of time it takes to submit that and maximize the amount of money they get back. Cool. That's a really specific outcome of current value. Do you guys track that? Yeah, we track it in our systems. Well, that's cool. So that's another layer that you can add in there. I think when I think about the KVAs too, what's helpful is saying, my God, and it's kind of like what Jeff was saying, my goodness, like, our time to market is okay. Our ability to innovate, it's okay. Our current value, not so good. Lots of potential in the market. They might be a startup, right? So what are we going to do to try to improve that? What are the experiments? What's that goal we're trying to hit?
Mm-hmm. And so for you, Jeff, like, here, we'll give you some free coaching. We'll see where this goes.
All right.
What's a selling point, right, for Health Champion? Is it like, hey, we are going to improve health outcomes, and so is that in your current value then? And so do you track, hey, these key areas like blood pressure, cholesterol, things like that people are going into your application and tracking, because now they can see it across different health providers. They own that data, and they can see it, and it's visible, and they're tracking against it. We've actually decreased that, and people are healthier because they've used our application. If you can sell big providers probably on using your application, if you can say, like, this is going to improve people's health. And so, like, that might be a big thing for your current value to help you capture unrealized value in the
market. Or think about the COVID thing that you guys are working on.
So
that's unrealized value there. Okay.
The trickiness, no, I like it, but the trickiness is you're assuming you have customers in order to do that validation with. And so when you're much further in the startup, like, we don't have a product yet. Or, I mean, let me rephrase that. We do have, exactly, Patricia, as you were just saying, like, we've got the COVID-19 product out there. But I'm thinking more about the other one, where we've got, we've gone through some early user analysis, some user feedback on just, like, what are some general, so in the perioperative space, people going pre and post operation. We've gotten some feedback on some of the problems that are going on out there, the problems that they're encountering. So we've decomposed that down into the first level of experiments that we want to run. So building, a lightweight clickable prototype is kind of where we're at right now, as we're starting to actually build out the real functionality inside of there. So that we have no customers that are using it. Essentially, we're much earlier in that truth curve in validating these things out. So that's kind of where I'm stuck with it. Like, it makes sense when you've got customers that you're able to do this out there with, but where I am not able to make that mental connection is when it's much earlier in the experimentation of pre-product market fit, very early in product development life cycle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's good. I think that for me, this notion of goal becomes super important there again. And then I would think that when we look at, so obviously you're looking at some sort of number, right? There's some sort of number that you have in there, which is why somebody would invest, and that funding comes through, right? So what are those numbers? That's current value and potential value in the unrealized value. And then I think that another thing that also is an asset for the company is the employees, right? So that goes into current value. And the interesting thing that now you look at those holistic through the KVAs is the employees. So there's some sort of value there, right? And you can also look at the cost that's current value, right?
Yep.
But your employees are also, what's really interesting is that they have and hold this knowledge. So should that also be something that's part of ability to innovate? Like those are things, because how happy or how much, whatever their potential is or whatever their productivity is, that affects your ability to innovate too. So all these things are somehow related, um, to me, in terms of whatever you have, whatever you would consider that current value, would be a really interesting thought case for me. Good one.
It is a good one.
Yeah,
This is a good one.
I appreciate the free coaching, but like that isn't necessarily where I want to draw all the conversation to. For the COVID-19 pathway or that product solution, that makes a whole lot of sense. Back to like what is your customer looking to do? Like what do they want out of the product? Realistically, the majority of our customers, well, they want to make sure that their employees are happy and healthy, but they also just need something in place because of, a lot of our big customers are in New York, and New York has mandated that you have to have, not accountability, it's not the right word, but not traceability either, but you have to have in paper what happened to who, when, right? So on a daily basis, somebody has to submit that information, and as an organization, they have to be able to provide that to some sort of auditing trail if anybody was to ever come back and ask them for it.
So it's not a product for individuals, isn't it? Like on the app, or you can like get them.
So yeah,
Sorry,
that's
we're
no,
just
no, no.
we're going deep.
That's okay. It is a platform, so there is a member application where you can do things like sync your EMR, your electronic medical records. It's HIPAA compliant, but then that's kind of the platform, and then the COVID-19 solution sits on top. So it was just kind of a quick pivot. Actually, like as an organization, we put that product out there within a few months, and it's been very successful right now. The problem is COVID's going to go away eventually here, so now we're thinking about what is that next solution, which is what I was talking about before. So kind of going a little bit deep here with the understanding. But so you've got a member application that has a different but related use case to it. Like, why does a member want to use the application? Well, it kind of depends. We've got people who are caring for other individuals. And so I want to be able to track all this healthcare information for my aging parents or for my ailing spouse or whatever that happens to be, right? So that's a use case. But then it also, right from inside the application, you submit the COVID-19 pathway information. Like, are you going to work today? How are you feeling? Are you displaying any of these symptoms? Have you traveled outside of these tri-state area or whatever that happens to be, right? It's all configurable. And that's for the organization level, who's really the end customer or user in that scenario. So
I got something for you, Jeff. So Rachel Krause, who we used to work with and been on the podcast before, she's got this article out there a blog that she recently posted about using knowledge boards. So she's a UX professional, pro.
Oh, with Nielsen Norman Group, we should plug her there.
Yeah, we can plug her, right? and so what she does is she has this thing where in the knowledge board you have this section where you have questions, and then these are assumptions based off these questions that we've come up with. Here's some research that we need to do now to validate these assumptions, and then here's the facts that we've actually learned. So what I was wondering is, what if you had something like that, and then you track the number of facts you found out as you're underneath that truth curve for a while, and that could be part of your current value. So we've learned that if somebody's taking care of their parents and they're older than X age, they're not going to use our application. Like it has to be this target market. We've learned that it doesn't work. People aren't savvy enough to integrate the data from multiple sources if they're not whatever, or 95% can't, or something like that. Like that might be a fact you learn as you go through this.
Taken up one step from there, and I like that, but I think it just goes back to that's another lens of simply counting how many experiments that you're running on a basis, right? Essentially, those questions are just experiments or something that you need to validate one way or another. In the same way that in execution mode, right, when you're developing a feature, it's still an experiment. Like, is this customer actually going to find value from this thing? But you brought it back earlier so there's no code going on. It's just experimentation with these outstanding questions that you want to actually validate to prove that you should continue moving along with development. So I like that. I was just kind of like generalizing that.
Yeah, I mean, a leading indicator in your current value could be the number of experiments that's validated. Like, I think that's a pretty good leading indicator. The more experiments you validate, the probably closer you're going to get to something that's really valuable for your customers.
I kind of shy away from that. So this is why I'm very much more about the goal. And when you're in such a complex state, I would rather see a goal and an outcome and just try to do it as fast as possible rather than sitting like I just see so many companies get lost in like, how am I going to find the leading lagging and you're just like, okay, well, if we're talking about a complex space, that means that we're just going to try to, and of course you know, people talk about leading and lagging indicators. What I'm really interested is in those experiments that you're running. What are you learning from them, right? So, and that goes back to the whole goal notion rather than like, let's just kick something out the door. Oh my God, we have really happy employees. We're such a fun place. We have beer on Fridays. That's good. Why don't you know anything in current value? And it's okay to just say, this is blank for us right now. What are we going to put in there?
Mm-hmm.
But that's important to help figure out what that next experiment is going to be, right? Because we've learned these things don't work. We've learned these things do work, but we haven't found out how to position them all together. And so, like, now let's brainstorm what's the next thing we can try to hit that goal that you're talking about. So I think they play really nicely together, especially if you're in that space where Jeff is right now, where you're trying to find that product market fit and you haven't really found that niche yet, you know? Like, I think that's always a tough space. And if it was easy, everybody would do it. But
yeah, that's why you're doing it. That's why you're doing it, Jeff. That's why you're doing it. Good luck.
Yeah. Well, luckily I got Weber with me, so.
Oh, I know. I should text him. I should just add him to the podcast. Just add his face.
He's probably out for coffee.
So one of the things that's really interesting to me is, I don't know how you guys feel it, but this notion of like measurement not being the sexiest in conversations, but becoming really important. And there's this really interesting thing to me about like, it's all about the team and let's develop those great coaching skills and all those things. And I was having some conversations and we were looking at some with some people and we were looking at some data and it was just saying, all these companies are trying to, you know, have agile transformations. The greatest resistance to agile transformation. Oh, and, you know, so it'll say, you know, so many companies are doing agile transformations. So little of them really have seen in their ability to adapt and pivot, which is really important now during times of like coronavirus and recessions and stuff. And then you see, and the large number of, you know, why it's not working is because of resistance with leadership and culture, right? So we think about enterprise and leadership, what I do at Scrum.org. And you go, well, so then that means that all those companies that aren't, you know, seeing some sort of ability to pivot and adapt, they're doing, let's just call zombie transformations, whatever. It's just lip service, right? They're just getting trained up. And then what we've been looking at is this notion of what EBM and why I think it really has value is because you're trying to look at something super tangible. And when you're looking at these companies that are saying, oh, there's so much resistance, it's because while we're talking about, you know, Scrum and Agile and values and all those things, super important, right? Lots of integrity, but you're not showing them how this is a better way. You're not showing how am I going to outcompete within the current system? How am I proving to you? How am I outperforming the way that we traditionally work? And so when I think about, you know, a lot of the conversations where honestly, like 2 years ago, it was this whole thing. It's the culture. The culture is it. And now it's like all about measurement. And I'm just, you know, I'm making some of these jumps, but it's like, that's what I was talking to you guys about, this notion of like, there is a lot of, if you don't know who the sucker in the room is, it's you. So like, how do you know, coming at it with this kind of information, the things that you think about, for instance, in your work, and Health Champion, Jeff, like those things really matter, like the accountability, the tangible results. What is this telling me? How do I make movement from here, to really add value back to the conversation? So I'm seeing like almost like this kind of divergence in and how people are approaching the agile conversation now.
So I don't know if this is exactly where you were going with that, but because it would literally just happen earlier today.
Oh, I'm not going anywhere with this. It's just stuff that swashes in my mind.
I've been tracking cycle time for we have one primary development team. It's about 10 people now in total. And I've been tracking our cycle time through ADO and just saying, okay, so just trying to simplify the conversation from the point that we start working on it until the point that it's done. Okay. And start working is it moves into our system of developers are working on it, or the development team is working on it, I should say. So, since let's just say July 8th, our average cycle time was about a 3. Our average cycle time today is at a 9. And so there's a very clear upward trend line with all of this stuff. And again, by the time this comes out, the update to the Scrum Guide will be out there. Where I've always gotten really pissed was the fact that, like, apparently as a product owner, I shouldn't say, why is our cycle time increasing like this? This seems really weird. With the, and I know, Jeff, what you're going to jump in here with, but the way it's been articulated is that's the development team. They are self-organizing and they should be figuring this stuff out. But
self-managing now.
Yeah, self-managing now. Yeah.
But bullshit. Like, I'm the product owner. I do care about this stuff. Why can't I bring this up and initiate a conversation about it? Like, I care about all the things that you were just talking about before, and I care about, why is our cycle time going up? Why is our predictability or our predictability decreasing with what we're able to deliver? Like, I care about that stuff, but like, I've always gotten the feeling like I'm not allowed to ask those types of questions as the product owner. I should just be, go for it, Jeff.
So I'm really want to jump into this because I just watched those videos that were, well, they were just for PSTs, but they were from Ken about the updates from the Scrum Guide. And in one of them, he talks about how he doesn't want the product owner sitting there in front of the development team saying, hey, you guys said you're going to get all this stuff done and you didn't get it done. What the heck? Like, this is your responsibility. What he wants them to say is like, hey, we're in this together. How do we improve this going forward? And I think that's really what you're saying. Like, you don't want to be the sole person responsible for it, but you want to be partnering with the development team to figure out the solution. I think of it very much like a sports team. Like, if I'm a football team, the head coach is the product owner in this example. He doesn't say, well, you didn't score enough points, so we didn't win. You guys really, laid an egg there. Like, you're part of that. Like, you're part of that practice schedule. You're part of calling the plays. You're part of everything. And so if your, yards per play is going down and you're the coach, like, you need to do something about that with the development team, with the team that's actually, doing the work in this case. And so I think that's very, very clear. And I think that's a big thing for you to focus on, right? Like, if the cycle time's getting longer, that probably means your throughput's getting less. That means you're running less experiments, so less stuff's going out there, so you have less opportunity to find product market fit. Like, from a business standpoint, you can only handle so much of that. And so I think I would articulate that to the team and say, this is why I care about this, and I want to work with you to figure out a solution. What do you think, Patricia?
No, I'm starting to see, is this podcast generally like no, I think especially with the update, but like, when I think about when you're as a product owner, you're going to be thinking about, again, that word investing, right? I spend this money. We have 10 people. Do we need more? Naturally, imagine it wasn't you. We're not going fast enough. We must need more people, right? That's a move people make.
We should offshore.
Yes, we should offshore. We should do that again. And it goes, you have to go and say, all right, if I make this decision, what am I expecting out of it? It's kind of like an experiment, right? If I am going to invest more, and so it's nice to have that information. And I think that now with the Scrum Guide, it talks about that notion of the team to have that conversation. I mean, I think that always should have been the conversation, frankly, which is probably what the update was all about. But it's if you think about that, and it's actually what the other Jeff said, That all makes sense. Should I call you Jeff 1 and Jeff 2? Like, how does this work?
Everybody does it different.
Because I'm just looking at you guys, but like that doesn't even translate because my camera's over here and your faces are over here.
Yeah, you could go with, Jeff B, Jeff M if you want. You could just say Jeff and
just Jeff.
We'll figure
one of
it
us.
out.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
Yeah. Okay. Blonde Jeff, brown Jeff.
Yeah.
What I apologize. We've gotten deep into the weeds here, but what was the other topic that you wanted to discuss?
Culture and power dynamics as it relates to EBM.
I mean, no. I mean, that's what I was kicking out there, and that's
okay. Yeah. So let's dive a little deeper on that. So I know you're kind of introducing that with like the, everything's about team and the environment now. Everything's about metrics, and it can't be one or the other. It's definitely got to be both. Right? Like there has to be a direction you're going and a purpose of what you're tackling. And then there also has to be psychological safety where we can experiment and learn and trust each other and have this, learning environment that we can all thrive. If you don't have both, I think it's difficult.
I guess I've been thinking about this from the context. I agree with you from the context of transformations, right? So maybe not necessarily the situation of a startup that says we know we're Agilists, we're gonna do this in that way. But the notion that the conversation I was having with this Russian guy was PST, and we'd been thinking about the same thing because it was really about this notion of how does power serve in this, right? And so Kurt Bittner and I have talked a lot about the third rail of Agile transformations is status. So how does it work if I tell you, oh, team, Agile coaching, be so safe. And by the way, this is the bonus structure and how it works. There's a promotion. This is how it works. And so we're really thinking about benefits and HR and the rest of the organization, how it affects that. When you get into those, and then you can preach about like till you're blue in the face about Agile values, Scrum values, and we're all this self-managing team. But it's that sucker thing because there's that power dynamic that has to play out. And what we were talking about when what we're thinking about and why the tangible, focus of EBM is powerful for me with this stuff is because when you're thinking about, let's say it's bottom up intelligence, we want all the teams to be agile, but we need that C-level person to support it. And so we're saying we don't have enough power. We need to borrow it from you. We need you to support us and to say, hey, those people, they're doing a great thing. Come support us. And that can work. But what the hypothesis is that that's fragile. And that's why we see anytime those champions leave, it falls apart because that power was fake and it went away. And just these dynamics, like if you are a coach, if you are a Scrum Master, really understanding this notion of they would say power literacy, right? Like being able to understand what that means. And this is looking, back into like Machiavelli stuff and looking at history and looking at those things of how do you actually hold that power. And when you, for instance, let a team struggle and then you pick them back up, that's a power move in itself, right? So like these dynamics of how you can actually try to move forward in a different way. So now was it all worth it, or is it better just to say the only way we can work in this different way is to say there is actually value in working this way. You get better results.
Well, I'll say this: there's always leaders that come to me and say, "How come my team doesn't have the same level of ownership and commitment that I have?" And these are owners sometimes in companies, and I say, "Well, they don't have the upside that you do they? Like you have all the upside." And they have very little. Like theirs is pretty simple. Like what if you could give them some, we've started giving them the autonomy to work a little differently. What if we could also give them some upside and we could start to delegate? And you can't just give everything away. You have to teach people the business. You have to teach people how to do this slowly. And it's there's a process to this, right? Like if there could be chaos if you just all of a sudden like, here you go, like figure everything out on your own. And so I guess to answer that question, I think about like you need to start from a leader's perspective. If you want to really change the culture, you need to change the way where power comes from, and you need to start giving it away slowly with the guardrails and the boundaries that you're thinking about, and teach people to do that so that when you're gone, when the next person's gone, that there's a system there that can replace that. And so there's this. We had Gary Hamel on recently, and I know we've quoted him a couple times on different episodes, but he's got this great quote of the problem with capitalism. There isn't a problem with capitalism. The problem is there's not a capitalist in our organizations. And so, how do we add more capitalists? We need to add entrepreneurs. We need to give them that upside. And so, there's many different creative ways to do that. And so, I think that's a way to start doing that. You can start doing that by giving that power away, and whatever power you have wherever you are in the organization. What are your thoughts?
It may
I think
even be that, for instance, you can have that accountability and that authority, and you know when to take it and when to put it
yes.
back. Because if there's so many dynamics in there that are really, really interesting, and to look at that in terms of how does that work within systems and societies, like where does hierarchy show in different things, and how does that actually work? And I mean, it all comes back down to it, right? Like, are you just holding your organization back from moving forward by doing those things?
When you hold on to information, you limit the decision power or the ability to make good decisions by everybody else in the organization.
Yeah. And that doesn't have to be the highest person, right?
No, it can be anywhere, right, in the organization, right? So free flow of information, favor decision making by many over the few, making that ownership, being able to handle like conflict. I think those are all things that kind of like lead you down that environment that we're talking about.
But what's incentive? What's incentive for me to do that?
I think you have to put that upside in there. So we're sharing in the profit somehow, right? And maybe that means you take a lower salary, but there's much greater upside if things go well. I don't know. Like, me personally, I'd be willing to experiment with that. I think there's people out there that people that believe in themselves and their skills that they bring to the table, I think would be. People that don't have maybe the best skills wouldn't. So maybe that helps you with your hiring decision.
Yeah.
And
that's why I'm hoping this notion of the goal really drives people to have those conversations too, right? And that we make that transparent, and so that we can have some alignment around that.
Mm-hmm. So thinking about it from a leader/owner perspective, kind of going along with what Jeff was just saying, like why, and really trying to put myself in their position, why wouldn't I want that type of system where my employees have some sort of buy-in, so that when the organization does good, they do good. When the organization does poorly, they do poorly. Are there any downsides to that you can think of?
When the organization does well, a lot of times they do really well, and there's a lot, and so they just want that big upside,
Yeah, there's ego. There are all sorts of reasons.
Okay.
Maybe we should ask people why.
Well, I was just kind of curious thinking through it, and I don't know why it took me so long to think about it, but like if I was the owner, wouldn't I want people that are more bought into it? And by being more bought into it, like when you have a share of the outcome in a positive or negative way, like I would imagine that's going to make me more bought into it. Mm-hmm. And more likely to do the right thing for the organization, which is going to make us more likely to achieve the goals that we're going after, which is more likely going to make me a very rich owner. Like, I'm just trying to think, like, what am I overlooking that I wouldn't want these things in an organization?
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to the other conversation around, like, do organizations have a responsibility to do good things for society and the environment, right? And so what is the benefit that Home Depot gets when they put in all these, nice plans for their employees? And they're saying, you know what, it's not because we just want to be nice for our employees. When we do things like this, it is good for the entire company and numbers go up, right? And so it's the conversations that you've been having around capitalism, I'm sure, are revolved around this. But there's just a lot of different schools of thought and just where we've been before. And I think this notion of leader is also interesting too, right? To look at the levels and leadership and all that kind of stuff.
And that was, I guess, since you hit on it right there when you were talking about leaders, when you were talking earlier, I forget exactly how you articulated it, but borrowed trust or borrowed authority, just, when that leader disappeared, it was all just fake and it came crashing down. But if you were really to do, or had a leader who was really doing that, I would imagine that there are certain levels that would naturally become unnecessary in an organization, and the natural byproduct of that would be a more flatter organization.
From an organization I've been participating with this organization that's been going through a transformation for 5 years, let's say. And the champion there, she's working really hard and she has convinced executive after executive, and then it'll go really well. And then that executive leaves. So even whatever power she's borrowing or however that's working, she has to start over again when a new CEO comes in, a new general manager. And that is so tiring for her. And, even that's another conversation about just kind of like this general fatigue that we can face. But the interesting thing is that, did she acquire some power? Did she have some sort of agility that's been there that shows the results that people are coming and looking at? But it's almost like they have to start again sometimes. So it depends who leaves and what was there. And I'm not articulating this well, but it's really interesting when when you're working with C-level people and they're just like, oh, I'm coming over to that Agile group now. What are they doing? And you've got to like start all over again and show them how this is great, and hopefully you've built up this evidence that can show that there's value in this.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like you could, search and replace that C level with just about any organizational authority in a typical business today, right? It's that, great, now I've got to go back and teach this new person coming in that it's not all like trust falls and like group activities, right? There is some actual empirical evidence as to why this is a benefit to the organization.
Yeah. Or project manager to the scrum master. Well, like there's so much of that.
And I would say for those organizational powers and leaders, like a lot of them have been burned in the past. Like there's a lot of fake Agile out there, or zombie Agile, zombie Scrum. And just talking with an organization recently, like the CEO has been burned multiple times by vendors coming in saying they're Agile, and then like they don't deliver anything for a year, and then they have these multi-million-dollar overruns, and they just are not bought into this Agile thing. And it's like, well, I get why, like, but this is what we would be doing differently, and this is why they weren't living the values. This is why they weren't doing. They were saying it, and it was in a name only what they were doing, and I think, that takes some convincing and some trust. And maybe that's what you're talking about, Patricia, with that person. Like maybe that person coming in had a bad flavor from somewhere else, because when somebody knows something works and they can sell it, and if they just use these right words, they start using it and it gets used in a bad way, So I think that's out there too. So we all have to deal with, deal with that when we go to different organizations.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point.
So how do we? So that's where EBM can be a great thing, because it's like, well, how do you know this actually worked? And it's like, well, at this organization, here's what we saw, and you know what? Do you care about time to market? Do you care about these current value metrics? Do you care about unrealized value that we captured? I think most people do.
Yeah, I mean, like, don't even have to throw in the word Agile, right? Like, this is where we are. This is, and when people have these conversations about like, how much is this costing us, or Jeff, where you might be, it's this when we're talking about alignment, it's how much money does it cost you to make this decision with this layers of what you're doing. Well, that's great that you guys are building something, but like, how much money are you spending, and what is that? What is the, like you were talking about the burn rate? What are you looking at? What are we getting in return? How are we getting something out to market so that we can actually learn something? And all those are not necessarily Agile conversations. So maybe they're management conversations, I don't know, but evidence-based management is much more about this holistic managing, and just be aware when you're making those decisions rather than doing this, right? Like gut-based management is what Ravi Verma would say, that we're actually using information to do it, and we're not localizing into one area to say like, we did great here. That doesn't matter. I mean, it's nice.
Right. And also, like, if you're talking about this, it also probably means we have our products aligned around something that the organization cares about, not a component of the organization, or something that's like, yeah, you could be doing great, but who cares if we can't sell the product, or something like that, which I think pushes people in the right direction.
This is sounding really cutthroat. Everybody listening is going to just think I'm super, super cutthroat.
Why do you say that?
It's just like, I don't care about all this. Show me. And it's not about that, but I do strongly believe with a lot of that fake or zombie or all of that stuff, that this is how we bring back and focus on the notion of empiricism and deeply what needs to exist for us to make that happen.
I would go one step further with your cutthroatedness. Like, if you're not cutthroat about some of this stuff, I'm going to nudge you and say you're probably not thinking about it like it's your money. Like, if
Hmm.
you were the CEO, you were the one putting this money on the line, wouldn't you give a damn about this stuff? And like all the other great agile stuff that you're thinking about, that's good too. But if my business isn't successful, fuck all of that. Like, it is irrelevant. So,
Yeah.
like, at the end of the day, it still has to be a successful business. We still have to make money. And how are we going to measure that? And it can't just be like a monthly revenue target. There is more to that, but that's still part of the conversation. So I don't think
Having
it's
the
cutthroat
ability
at
to make
all.
that decision, right? Having the ability to say, this is what we are doing with
Right.
your money. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Those are all really good things to always keep in mind.
Yeah, I use the analogy with teams a lot of times. Well, what would you do if your whole entire 401k was riding on this product right now? And so these are what the metrics look like. What are you going to do in this situation? And the conversation changes. Or if you ask them, like, okay, if we don't get this thing done, we don't get paid, because we only get paid when we get stuff done. That's the only time our customers actually give us something, pay us for our, what we've produced. So what if you didn't get a paycheck until we got it done? How would we work? How would we work a little different? And usually it gets us closer to line to the way we'd want to work in a professional Scrum manner. So
That's nice. Yeah, I have seen this actually where we were talking about money, and the only person who said in the room, we're not doing this, not right for we need to see, is that money better spent somewhere else, was somebody who it really would affect their paycheck at the top.
mm,
Then I've even myself, like, at times have to be reminded, what are we doing, at scrum.org to make sure we're spending the people who own the company their money well, and trying to use that to improve the profession, and to work toward our mission, right?
mhm.
It's always a good reminder. Thank you for that slap in the face again, Jeff. We did it about, like, once every 2 weeks. So
Yeah. Well, life can be cruel. So. Yeah. No, this has been a really good conversation, Patricia. I guess kind of wrapping down here. Is there anything you want to plug or promote?
voting? No. So
Yes.
when this gets released, we'll see. So we have, in September, we quietly published the new version of the evidence-based management guide. Um, and so people will be seeing a lot more thoughts there. And then we're actually in December going to be releasing, um, we expect to be releasing the EBM in the PAL, the Agile Leadership Track, the assessment and certification. We're going to be using that to really learn how us as a community and the PSTs can really share some more ideas around this, because I think these ideas are solid. It's just about, as you can see, like this conversation we're having, who the fuck do we need to talk to first, right? When we share like the courseware, is it like something we just need a private workshop? Is it public? But we've been doing a lot of learning around that, and so there's some stuff that we're gearing up there probably for 2021. So those are things that are coming out, and we're doing a lot of stuff around the scaling. We have been actually speaking about Nexus, the scaling. I'm so happy. There was a case study that we're recently working on where people can learn about. Um, there was a company, the Ministry of Health in Europe, in some country, who had been trying for 10 years to develop an e-prescriptions platform. 10 years. This company came in, and they were using Nexus because they had been starting to do Scrum, and they got it done in 15 months. This finished right before the time that COVID hit. And so because of this and because of their progress, they have been able to do so much for their country and community, getting over 1 million prescriptions out on this platform. It's amazing. So we're going to be sharing more stories like that as we work through, and we've been learning for years with these companies what Nexus looks like with them. So that's cool too.
That's very cool.